Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick and this is our roundup of the best carbon plate running shoes for racing available in 2024. In this video we're going to run through a host of top carbon plate options in quite a lot of detail. It's a long video, so strap in or just skip to whatever shoe you're interested in the most. I'm going to talk it through with the other people on the Run Testers team. We've all been testing carbon shoes for ever since the original Vaporfly. We've tested most of the top shoes available on the market today. So of each shoe we'll run through the details of the design, give you our thoughts on them, where they maybe sit on the market and who they might be good for, what kind of races they might be good for. And hopefully there'll be a carbon option in there that will really suit you and your needs and you can give it a try. So we have tested a lot of carbon shoes, but we haven't tested absolutely everything, and there are a few notable exceptions that won't be in this video. Some that we haven't tested yet, like the Ultra Vanish Carbon 2, we haven't been able to get hold of, and most notably the Adidas Pro Evo 1. This is Adidas's top racing shoe, the one that you see on the feet of their top elites, but it's really expensive, it's hard to get hold of, it doesn't seem like a very consumer focused shoe compared to some of the other options in the Adidas range, but we will endeavour to get that shoe to test. But that's probably the biggest shoe that isn't in this video, and then there are a few that we've left out because there's a lot of shoes in this video already and they don't necessarily feel like the top option from their brand, such as the On Cloudboom Echo 3, which we've left out now because the Cloudboom Strike has come out. But there's still absolutely loads of carbon shoes in the video. You're going to get your fill of carbon shoes, and if you have any questions about them, just dive into the comments and let us know. Okay, Tom's joined me now and we're going to talk about the Nike Alphafly 3, a very big launch right at the start of this year, the shoe that was used to set the marathon world record by Kelvin Kipton last year in Chicago. Very impressive shoe, one I like an awful lot. Tom, you also like this shoe, but you still have a big favouring for the Alphafly 1, right?
Yeah, I think the Alphafly 3 is a good shoe. It doesn't quite work as well for me as the Alphafly 1 does. I really liked the Alphafly 1 was basically a big meaty chunk of bouncy foam, and you can really feel that bounce. The Alphafly 3 is a little bit more subtle, I think. Definitely a fast shoe, but for me it just doesn't have the bounce that I like from a super shoe.
See, I prefer the Alphafly 3. I think it's the best version of the Alphafly yet because it's lighter and it has a smoother transition. So for this version, Nike got rid of the decoupled midsole. It's now one continuous midsole, so you flow a bit more naturally, I think, from heel to forefoot, and then that engages those forefoot pods a bit more effectively. So those pods are the big difference between the Alphafly and the Vaporfly. They have a slightly firmer feel under the forefoot. They give you a bit more kind of propulsive feel, I guess, than the entirely ZoomX midsole on the Vaporfly. Obviously, they both have carbon plates as well, but yeah, I really love the Alphafly. It was kind of my favourite carbon plate racing shoe until the Metaspeed Sky Paris came out. I think it's a really good shoe. It's quite different to the Alphafly 2, which, Tom, you've not tested, but that was quite a lot heavier. The Nike went for all-out bounce of that shoe and made it quite heavy, and I think the Alphafly 1 is probably the better bouncy one in the range so far, and then the Alphafly 3 probably moves a bit closer to the Vaporfly, but still has probably a bit more bounce, I'd say, than the Vaporfly still, though.
Yeah, I'd agree on that, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a bigger shoe, but not that much heavier these days. So I think it is a really good all-distance racer, geared a bit more towards the marathon, where obviously it looks amazing in every big event because Nike has a lot of very good athletes who use the shoe, but in general I think it is a very good shoe, but also exceedingly expensive, even for a carbon plate racing shoe.
Yeah, one big point that I'll mention about that is that I haven't ripped the bottom off of that shoe, and I've done quite a lot of miles in it, so that's a big positive for the Alphafly 3.
Yeah, we will be covering Tom ripping shoes up in due course. Don't worry about that. There's plenty of shoes to come where Tom's ripped up. But you did actually use the Alphafly 3 for Boston, didn't you, this year, Tom? But that wasn't your best race, right? You just basically didn't have a very good race.
I didn't have a very good race, no. But I did notice that I did think when I was running it, I wish I was wearing the Alphafly 1s. But I don't think it wouldn't have had a massive impact on my overall time. That was mainly down to my own training and lack of ability at that point, but yeah.
Very strong first 10k downhill though, so at least you got that.
Yeah.
All right, so then we'll move on to Nike's other shoe, which is the Vaporfly 3. So this came out last year. This is a bit different to the Vaporfly 2. So Nike added a bit more stack and reduced a little bit of outsole rubber. And we are going to talk about outsole rubber with Tom, don't worry. But I think it made it a slightly softer shoe. I like it more than the Vaporfly 2. Well, it's quite close, but I like the Vaporfly 3 a bit more because I suppose I focus more on long distance races. And I think the Vaporfly 3 is a slightly better marathon shoe. I ran the London Marathon it last year. Vaporfly 2 is still a great marathon shoe, obviously, and a bit firmer. But the Vaporfly 3, you've now got a really lightweight shoe that has a lot of cushion. I think it's a really good all distance racing shoe.
Now, I like bounce and softness. I think the Vaporfly 3 is softer than the Vaporfly 2 and the 1, but I did find that softness felt a little bit energy sapping for me. I felt like it was a little bit less bouncy and speedy for me, especially over like half marathon distance. I really noticed that foam was compressing a bit more than I wanted to. I still think it's a great shoe, And definitely, if you wore the 3 over the 2, you're not going to have a massive difference. But I still think the 2 is superior.
Interesting. I'm not sure how easy it is to find the 2 these days. It's probably still out there, especially around Black Friday. But I really like the 3. I actually ran a 4.8k leg of a relay in it, and it was very close to my 5k PB pace. I wasn't really expecting to run that fast. Like I say, ran the London Marathon. I think it's got loads and loads of range. It's definitely, though, one of the least durable shoes, I would say, of the carbon thing. So Tom's obviously ripped the outsole off like he does with lots of shoes, but even if you're not going to rip the outsole off entirely, the outsole is very minimal and it's going to degrade quite quickly, I'd say. I think you still keep the bounce in the shoe for quite a while. I think I've got well over 100k on mine and it feels bouncy, but that outsole is a bit of a problem, isn't it, Tom?
Well, I've ripped mine off within the the first 9k that I ran a race. The first time I used it was in Worthing 10k, and at 9k had come off. I look at it and I stopped and picked it up and used some shoe goo and put it back on, and it worked. It's worked for a bit longer, but it's not as good as it started. It basically that 1k of running without an outsole on it, it really did ruin the midsole.
Yeah, it was horrific to see it straight away. But you're not alone in this one. Like, you do this to loads of shoes, but this is definitely one that lots of people have trouble with. So a racing shoe you probably say for race day, one that actually is often in sales these days as well, so can potentially be a little bit of a bargain in the carbon shoe racing world. But yeah, I consider it right up there in my top tier of carbon shoes, probably in the top 5 or so, but lots of people aren't so sure about it. But then it's still the shoe you're going to see on most people's feet at races, so that tells you something as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm now joined by Kieran, and we're going to talk about probably my favourite new shoe, well, definitely my favourite new carbon shoe of the year, the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris. Got Kieran on because both of us actually ran our marathon PBs in this shoe. Asics rejigged the shoe compared to previous models by putting a new foam in the midsole, which is FF Turbo Plus, which is lighter, bouncier, and a bit softer than the previous foam used on the Metaspeed series. It's one of the most lightweight carbon shoes on the market. It's still really protective and bouncy and everything, and all round a shoe that we've loved using. Kieran, talk us through your use of it, obviously, and Manchester Marathon, wasn't it, for the PB?
Yeah, so this is I think is one of my shoes of the year for sure. I ran the Manchester Marathon in 2:54 something. Which was quite, it's a big kind of, a 3-minute PB. I'm saying that's a big PB, but it was decent for that. And I also went on a couple of weeks later to run a 5k PB in it as well, 17 something. And it's been a long time since I've broken both of those records. And this shoe delivered everything that I think you want in a race shoe. It's light. It's got that kind of snug race fit without feeling uncomfortable. You feel kind of held and held on the base of the shoe. It's basically light, racy, comfortable, snug fitting, but not too fussy. And then it's got that kind of ride energy that I think it's one of those shoes that kind of begs you to go faster and really looks after you when you do. Some of the thoughts I've had about it sort of not reminisce sort of back to almost like a Vaporfly 2 for its kind of ground contact and its sort of slight directness, but there's this real kind of stiff propulsion that I think you get out of that kind of midsole ride along with the plate. And there's like precision, agility, but also just I could really forget that I was wearing it. And I don't think that's true of all carbon shoes. Sometimes when I'm racing, I feel like the shoes can be doing a great job for me, but I am aware that they're on and I'm kind of having to work with the shoe. This just let me get on and go about my business. And yeah, with all the energy. And I think the other crucial thing for the marathon was in that last kind of 6 miles, I didn't feel any of that foot fatigue that you might get again from some carbon shoes. It just carried me through. One caveat to that, I ran well with good form from start to finish in that race pretty much. So I'm not sure whether or not I'd want to be in the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris if I was doing a real kind of struggle bus home for the last 6 miles, whether it's got the protection that some others have. But I think when you're running really well, I don't think right now there are many shoes that I've tested that are better.
Yeah, I think it's going to spearhead a bit of a movement back towards very lightweight shoes. I mean, the Adidas Pro Evo 1 did that as well, but I think shoes got bigger and bouncier, and the weight kind of gained as a result. And now Asics has got a shoe that feels that level of responsiveness in a much lighter design, which just help, especially when you're dragging yourself through those last few miles. You can keep turning your feet over. I found definitely with this that it did feel more natural, and it was easier to engage the plate in it and get back when I was tired at the end of a race compared to the previous models where I felt like I really had to be leaning into the shoe to get kind of the bounce back from it. They were still really fast shoes, but the Metaspeed Sky Paris, like, I pulled it on for our first run, liked it a lot, and just was using it in a really hard block of marathon training. Well, I had like my best track session ever in the shoe. I ran my parkrun PB in it as well. So again, it's got that range from 5k to marathon for sure. And yeah, just loved it and ended up using it at the London Marathon. Ran my PB of 2:27, and I think I ran my best half in it, but it wasn't my fastest half. So yeah, basically the first half of the year, I just had a lot of my best races ever in this shoe, and I do think it helps a lot. I think the only downside to it is the colours are a bit iffy and they're not always in stock. But other than that, great shoe. No more to say about that.
It does have a limit though, Nick. I saw somebody running in a pair of them at a 100-mile Berlin Wall Ultra, and I was like, that's brave.
That's punchy. So, we just talked about the Sky. Now to talk about the other Asics carbon plate racing shoe, the Asics Metaspeed Edge Paris. This is the one that is designed for cadence runners, the idea being that runners that mostly increase their cadence when they start running faster, who don't necessarily have a long, loping stride length. It's pretty similar on paper all round now to the Metaspeed Sky Paris. With previous models of these two shoes, there was a bigger difference between them, but now you've got the same stack, the same drop, but a different shape to the plate, which is a bit more scooped, so it lowers more at the forefoot, which should give the forefoot a softer feel and that kind of thing, and encourage this high turnover style. But Mike, how did you find the Edge Paris and compared to the Sky Paris, I guess?
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes that these two shoes, Metaspeed shoes, are much closer than they have been, and I think that's probably a bit of a compliment in terms of what we've got from the Sky, and I think bringing it close to that. Now, I don't know whether this has entirely convinced me about the cadence stride thing. This kind of debate with the shoes. I should be getting on better with the Metaspeed Edge Paris, but I find I prefer the Sky Paris. But they're both very good shoes. They're great weights. They're super light. Two of the lightest shoes ultimately you can race in at the moment, and you get those qualities that you want from a racing shoe, as well as it being light. They're kind of bouncy, aggressive. The kind of qualities that I want in a racing shoe. And I've had some really good kind of long training runs in these shoes. I think they work for shorter distances as well. They've absolutely got that in their locker as well too. And I think the key for me, crucially, is that the durability boost. I mean, there's still going to be shoes I would save for race day, but I think in terms of getting more mileage out of them, I think there is a little bit more in the in what you're getting in the Edge Paris and the Sky Paris. But I think the Edge Paris, for me, I actually find that maybe it's a little bit firm feeling from in the forefoot. I maybe noticed that's kind of how my experience with the Sky and the Edge Paris. I've just found it a little bit more comfortable, the Sky Paris, on those longer runs. But I do think that the Edge Paris is definitely, compared to the previous versions, more, I think, accommodating for running longer in. And I think that's, a big kind of, hats off to Asics for trying to get it, improving it on that front. I think it also adds the argument, I think, ultimately for me, is whether we need to have both of the shoes, because I think ultimately they're so close now. I think there's minor things in it, but I think, there's no doubt in the Edge Paris is a very accomplished, fast, light, racing shoe. It's just whether, it needs to still exist when these, Sky Paris is such a standout shoe. So,
see, I've kind of turned around, because I was in that boat as well. I think they're coming very close together now. I prefer the Sky Paris, but when I did a track session running a series of mile reps, using both of them for 3 miles in each of them, and I could feel the difference. So the Sky Paris, I prefer the Sky Paris, even though I should be a cadence runner as well. I feel like I get more bounce and uplift off the toes of that shoe. It really feels quite special. Edge Paris, I feel a bit more kind of dry from the midfoot, from the plate almost on it, and it's not a bad feeling. I think I prefer this. Well, I think I prefer the Sky Paris. I've had very good results in the Sky Paris. I've done some comparative stat stuff in our versus video, find some more details there, but they are very similar all round. But I think it's more a case of you try both. They're both really good shoes. One might feel better to you, and if it does, go with the one that feels better. I think their pros seem to use a mix of their shoes now. So, yeah, really, there's 2 great shoes there. Try them both if you can. If you can't, my instinct is to get the Sky Paris first. But, I wouldn't read too much into the cadence and stride thing. I think it's possibly a bit overblown that. It's really, but they are slightly different feeling, and go with the one that feels best if you have a chance to try both. Right, Mike has joined me now to talk about some Hoka carbon plate running shoes. The first of which is the Cielo X1, which I think is the shoe I've actually done more miles in this year than any other shoe. Well, I absolutely love the shoe. It's one of my favourite carbon plate racing shoes, but it's not necessarily one that I'd pick as the absolute quickest, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of spoken about, I think Hoka has had a really good year this year, and I think it kind of started with the Cielo X1, which is, a very different proposition to the Rocket X2. I kind of see it as kind of Hoka's equivalent to the Alphafly. Maybe not exactly the same shoe, but something that's going to probably give you a similar kind of experience. But it is a shoe that every time I've gone out with, I've just enjoyed running in it. And I think it's just fun, it's lively, it's bouncy, it's a great shoe to kind of go run long in. And I think crucially for me, I think particularly what we've seen this year is just getting the combination of those kind of foams in the midsole right, which I think gives you that really good experience. And I think, it's a shoe every time I picked up, I've never regretted kind of going out back in it, and I know I'm going to have a good time in that shoe. And I think it has enough in its locker. I know there's a thing about the weight, and for me the weight it's not massively an issue for me, but I think it doesn't get in the way of it. But just having being a really enjoyable shoe to run in, run quick in, and I do think it has the capabilities to just be a very fun, fast shoe to run in still, despite those kind of little things that are definitely against it, maybe.
Yeah, it's got this big Puma midsole, 2 layers of Puma, carbon plate, a really rocker design. It's unbelievably bouncy. It feels probably as bouncy as any carbon shoe out there. I've done so much marathon training in it. I've done a hard 24-mile run in it. I have also done some really fast stuff. I've gone to the track, done really hard reps, did the hardest track session of my life in that shoe, and it went well, and it has got that pace. But when you see the weight on the scales, you just think, it's really bouncy, but the Metaspeed, the couple other shoes are 50, 60, 70 grams lighter. I'll probably go with them for racing, but I think it does compensate for the weight with the amount of bounce it has. I did a half marathon racing it as well, which wasn't an all-out effort, luckily, because the laces came undone twice. It's got quite bad laces, the Cielo X1. Actually, they've only come undone for me twice in, I think, about 250 kilometers of running, but both times was in races, I think. So it's I don't know, and I triple everything. But anyway, I do think it's a great shoe. It's really fun. It's just maybe just lose a little bit on weight, and that puts a bit of a question mark beside it for shorter races. Great marathon option though. And then I suppose we might as well go seamlessly into off that the Hoka Rocket X2, which is their more lightweight racing shoe. It came out last year, but it's still kind of top of the range for them as their more lightweight racing shoe. Still very well stacked, still very comfortable. Again, Puma midsole with a carbon plate running through it. It's not 2 layers of Puma. It's not got quite as exaggerated a design as the Cielo X1, it's fair to say. It's a bit more of a traditional looking and feeling shoe, but still a very good option and a really fast shoe as well.
Yeah, I kind of see it as a bit more kind of aggressive, a bit more responsive in terms of my experience, and I think that's how I kind of see it in terms of, I think, me personally, I would probably, the Cielo X1 is one I would look to for running longer, and I do think it absolutely can work for kind of shorter distances, but I think that would be the shoe I would turn to, of those two shoes, to go for kind of longer, kind of marathon training runs. That's what how I've kind of used it. I think the Rocket X2, I think it really is a nice short distance kind of racer, but it has the capability now, compared to the previous shoe, I think, to, have in its locker to be a shoe that you can go longer in as well. And I think it's, all the kind of qualities you want in a carbon race. It's nice and light, I think in terms of that ride that you're getting there, you've got a nice kind of rocket feel to it as well. And it's another kind of special shoe in kind of Hoka's kind of racing kind of options and range there. And I think it's a different experience to the Cielo X1, but I think it's still a very good experience that is really nice, a really nice shoe to run fast in.
Yeah, it's a relatively low drop shoe compared to lots on the market. Well, actually, it's got similar stats to lots of them. It's one of the shoes that I think actually really feels low drop. It's got a very soft heel, I find, and that can be good or bad depending on your preferences. But I know there are some other low drop shoes out there that maybe feel a bit more rocketed forward, whereas the Rocket X2 does have kind of a flat feel, but with all that bouncy Puma, it's really good. I'd say those are probably Hoka's first 2 really serious competitive carbon plate racing shoes, the kind of first gens of them. So I'm really excited to see where they go from here. I think both of them are exceptional shoes. You can pick them up and race in them, but maybe I'm even more excited about what the next gen of the Cielo and the Rocket looks like, because like we've been saying, Hoka's had a fantastic year in nearly every way, and I think they're going to keep improving those shoes. Next up, we've got the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3. I think this is one of the best new carbon shoes of this year, and the first time I think that Puma's released a racer that really hits the standards and you can say very clearly this is as good as most of the other racers on the market. I think they've got a new aliphatic TPU foam in it that's also used in the Puma Fast-R too, but it's a very lightweight shoe. It's got a pretty traditional design for a carbon shoe with just a big old stack of a great foam, pretty standard continuous midsole, carbon plate, really lightweight, very fast. Tom, great shoe, right?
You're spot on. Yeah, I said it before. The Puma has never had anything in its range that I would reach for if I was going to go for a PB attempt at a race. I wouldn't. There weren't any Puma shoes that I would have picked up. The Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 2, nice shoe. I think I capped out with that shoe maybe at 10k. I probably wouldn't go over 10k in that shoe just because it's a little bit firmer for me than what I like from a shoe. The 3 is brilliant, standout shoe of the year. Just they've really worked out how to compete with the other carbon plate shoes on the market now, and I think it's one of the top ones now, and might even be the best option for some people.
Yeah, it's got quite a normal feeling ride actually. It's got that propulsive feeling, but it isn't so outlandish. We were just talking about the Mizuno shoe, and that's obviously a very different proposition. This is like a shoe I think that most people will pick up and it will work quite well. So this aliphatic TPU foam that Puma has put big stock in with its latest carbon plate racing shoes, their latest version of Nitro Elite. It's no longer using PIBA foams, which are obviously the most common ones in top racing shoe these days, but they say it delivers more energy return. It certainly feels like a very responsive foam. It's a little bit firmer than some of the foams on the other shoes, but not in an uncomfortable way. It just gives you that resiliency, that lovely bounce back. And then on top of all that, you get Puma grip on the bottom, which is probably the best rubber you'll find on any racing shoe in terms of actual grip. So I've actually done a kind of mixed terrain race in the shoe, half in like woodland trails and half on the road, and it was great for that. But it's just flat out a fast shoe, good for short distances, but has got the chops to go for the marathon now because they've increased the stack height compared to previous models. So, and especially in the UK, quite cheap, coming in under £200. Puma are also a brand that are notorious for sales where they don't exclude shoes. So I do think this is one of the ones that's going to be a really good value option that isn't just a value option. I do think, yeah, like we're saying, it performs at a standard that's very high.
Yeah, if it gets reduced like so many of Puma shoes do, I think it could well be one that we see on a lot of people's feet at the start of races in the next year or so.
Yeah, great shoe. Great to see. Obviously, I don't think Puma did this year was release that shoe with 3 carbon plates. It's great to see they're releasing very solid normal racing shoes as well as these more outlandish ones. Yeah. And on the more outlandish note, there is the other Puma shoe released this year, which is not as outlandish as the Fast-RB, the rule breaking shoe. This is the Puma Fast-R, which, similar to the Deviate Nitro Elite 3, increased the stack height compared to the previous model, made it more comfortable. It's still got this very distinctive decoupled midsole design where you can see the carbon plate in the middle, but you've got the aliphatic TPU in 2 different chunks. So Puma basically say the Deviate Nitro Elite 3 suits some runners better, and then the Fast-R 2 suits other runners better. It's a bit more of a propulsive ride. I think it's a bit of a heavier shoe, but if you have a bit more power, you can maybe sink in and get more back from it. I think it's the shoe that a few Puma athletes were using to set PBs early on in the year, like Rose Harvey, or maybe that was even the back end of last year. But yeah, it's another really good shoe, an improvement on what we've done before. Tom, you have not used this one, right? I don't think.
I have not, no.
Did you use the first Fast-R? You did, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a weird shoe. But This is a lot more comfortable, again, like the change from the Deviate Nitro Elite 2 to 3. It's not a shoe that necessarily suits me that well. I'm quite a high cadence runner. I think the more kind of natural, lightweight feel of the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 3 suits me a bit better, but it is a fast shoe. Done a lot of hard sessions in the Fast-R2. Raced a park run on Christmas Day with my Grinch socks on, and that went very well, so can't argue with that. Got a bauble, Tom. Did I ever tell you that? Got a wooden bauble for being first finisher on Christmas Day.
A park run?
Yeah. Someone had made it. It was very nice. Nice. But yeah, a really good shoe. I just think it's a harder one to recommend than the Deviate Nitro Elite. Because it's a lot more expensive. It's also heavier. I think some runners will really unlock a lot out of it by being maybe big bounding runners, more powerful runners than I am. But I think the Deviate Nitro Elite 3 is just, I think, a better carbon racing shoe, the one I'd pick and recommend to more people. But Fast-R, another a step in the right direction compared to the previous model. Puma definitely figuring things out, and a fun-looking shoe if you want something a bit more outlandish. Not as outlandish as the Rule Breaker, which is too outlandish.
I don't think any shoe is outlandish as the Rule Breaker.
Yeah, that's very true. Next up, we're going to go through Adidas's racing shoes, not including, unfortunately, the Pro Evo one, which none of us have tested yet. It's a bit of a weird one, Adidas, because the main shoe they've still got in their range, the main race legal shoe anyway, is the Adidas Adizero Pro 3, which is a bit older now. We've been expecting the Pro 4 for quite a while. It hasn't happened yet. It might still happen this year, but Pro 3 still stands up as a very good carbon plate racing shoe with a big Light Strike Pro midsole and Adidas's carbon energy rods running through it. It's got a very durable design for a carbon shoe, something I've noticed for sure, but also a bouncy one that works well for a range of races and is available now quite cheaply because it is a slightly older shoe, so you can get quite good deals on the Adidas Pro 3 for sure. Kieran, your thoughts on this shoe?
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I don't often sort of reach for, and I think because it's sort of now slightly older, it's easy to forget about them. But if you look around start lines, marathons, halves, Comrades Ultra, lots of races, I see a lot of people still wearing this shoe, and that probably speaks volumes about its overall capability. I think it's an excellent race shoe. Now, it's got that really sort of that big wedge of nice and light Strike Pro foam that I think responds fast with good amounts of energy. There's a sense of firmness to it as well that I think adds some immediacy to the return that maybe other shoes you've got a bit of compression, it's coming back a bit slower. This one, I think it's got a real kind of quick punch to it, which I really like. It's a shoe that I would, I'd happily go and race a marathon again in it. I think I picked the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris over this shoe, but a lot of that comes down to, for me, the fit and the uppers. This is one area where I'm not sure they quite nailed it. I find it quite hard to get a sort of natural feel on the foot. I have to work the uppers a bit. It just doesn't feel quite as comfortable. I also think that when I'm using the Adidas Pro 3, I have to find the sweet spot. So I'm working a bit harder with a bit more concentration to really engage that foam and those energy rods to get the most out of the shoe. There's some kind of instability for me and a bit of wobble, particularly if I'm not moving at my best pace and in my best form. But when you are, I think they're an excellent sort of capable race shoe, particularly for big sort of straight line kind of city marathons where you've got not too many twists and turns and corners, half marathons, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think they're still credible, and I do actually think when you're looking at how they would compare now on price, I think they sort of remains a really interesting carbon race shoe in the mix.
Yeah, I think that's right. These are a shoe that I think are really good, but not one that I just ever really clicked with. Like, I have raced in the shoe. I enjoy racing. I enjoy actually doing quite a lot of training in it at points because I do think it's a really durable shoe and it bounces nicely. It's one that probably veers a bit more to longer races for me because I'm quite a shuffly runner, and I think you get a bit more booming bounce from it if you're a bit more of a loper with the Adidas Pro 3. Adidas also has the Takumi Sen in its range, which is kind of a carbon shoe. We haven't included it in this video anyway, but that's a good option for shorter races in particular. It's one that I got on with quite well because it's a fair bit lighter, but I do think the Adidas Pro 3 is the superior all-round racing shoe than the Takumi, and the best one widely available from Adidas at the moment. It is a very good shoe. I just think it's one that I personally haven't really clicked with so much, but certainly one to consider. And if you can pick it up for like probably half the price of other new racers, then it's probably the smart thing to do because you're going to get a very high level of performance there. And then the other shoe, which is a bit newer from Adidas, is the Prime X Strung 2. Now, the original version of this was billed as the best racer in Adidas's range, but it's illegally high if you're an elite because it had a 50mm stack height. It's got a massive wedge of Light Strike Pro foam. You've got rods, plates, all kinds of things going on with the midsole. I think with the Prime X Strung 2, I think they made it a slightly tamer version of the Prime X, and it almost ended up being a super trainer in a way because it's a shoe you can use quite readily for a lot of training. I'm not really sure though it's one that I'd personally pick to race in, whereas maybe the Prime X1 I would have because even though it was a bit heavier than lots of shoes because of the high stack out, it still felt really fast. I think the Prime X2 has a bit more of a training feel to me. What do you think, Kieran?
Yeah, I think you do notice the weight. I mean, I think it's interesting that people have even drawn comparisons between this shoe and shoes like the Hoka Skyward X. I kind of see them as sort of quite separate and distinct. I certainly wouldn't use the Skyward X for the same things that I would the Strung 2. The Strung 2 for me still feels like a shoe that I would use to go fast race or fast training, even though it's markedly heavier than pretty much all the other carbon shoes. And I think you do feel that, and some people will find that limits how they want to use it, particularly over those shorter distances. I'd happily race a marathon in them. I think that the one thing I really loved about the original Prime X Strung was the way the uppers felt, and I really wanted those uppers on the Adidas Pro 3. They've now changed them, and I don't feel they fit quite as well. They're not quite as easy and comfortable. I struggle to get a bit of lockdown. I also think this new generation is a little bit less stable than the original. I've found it a bit more kind of wobbly, but perhaps that's how I've been using it. Maybe it's heavier. I've been using it kind of at slower paces where I engaged the first one a little bit more. Like I raced marathons in the first one and did good times. This one I've mainly used it just for training. Again, that said, I think it's another shoe when you're landing with precision and with concentration and you're really working to get the right energy out of the shoe. I do think it comes to life. And again, I would happily race in this over a marathon distance, even though it would be kind of illegal.
Well, legal for us anyway. But the thing would be, for me, it's not even really a question of legality with it. Like, it just for me, in Adidas's range, would much rather be in the Adidas Pro 3 for a race, just because it just feels better to me. Whereas this feels a lot more kind of like I say, long runs, great for long runs. Fast progression runs, that kind of thing. I did some mile reps in it at one point. By the end, I was going, I could probably lose 50 grams here. I wouldn't miss the bounce. But fun shoe and an interesting. Line. I think I definitely agree that it doesn't feel like the Skyward X to me. Skyward X feels very much like a slow training shoe. Really fun for that, but doesn't feel fast. The Prime X definitely feels fast, even in this second model, but just doesn't feel fast enough for me to justify going to this extra size and having that kind of extra size of shoe on my foot.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely a shoe. Like it's wild and it's fun and it's kind of exaggerated, and I like all of that stuff about it. But yeah, maybe now there are shoes that you'd probably choose over it for specific races.
Next up, we're going to look at New Balance's 2 new carbon races that were released this year, and the first of which was the New Balance SC Elite V4. Now, the SC Elite, or as it was called the RC Elite in early editions, has changed probably more than any other carbon shoe over the space of 4 generations. It was a very stripped-back, low-profile shoe at first, then it became really comfortable, really cruisy with the RC Elite 2. Then the third version was a bit more stripped back again, a bit lighter, a bit nimbler, a bit more rockered. The SC Elite V4 is rockered, but has a load of foam in it. It's now it's now a full PIBA midsole, bouncy, smooth, fun. Mike, you ran the London Marathon this year, I think. In general, what do you think of it?
Yeah, no, and I did London in it. I did a lot of my training miles in it as well, a lot of my longer runs, and it's a very different proposition to the previous shoe, which I think was a shoe that kind of grew on me. I didn't absolutely love the previous shoe, but I think the more time I spent in it, I did kind of appreciate it. And obviously, this is a massively kind of overhauled shoe compared to that, and I think ultimately the changes, what it does do is it has gone up a little bit in weight, but I think what you get, I think on the positive side, is I think you get something that is very controlled, very stable. I think the midsole feels a lot nicer for longer distances, and I think ultimately for me in the marathon it worked absolutely fine. It probably isn't as aggressive and as propulsive as some of the shoes that we'll probably talk about in this video, but I think in terms of being a more marathon friendly kind of New Balance shoe, I definitely think that's, it's much closer than it has been in the previous shoes, and that's really what I took from it in my experience. It maybe isn't the fastest shoe out there, but I think ultimately in terms of what I wanted to do in that race, and I wanted something that was going to be comfortable, stable, still give you that kind of nice, kind of peppy kind of ride in it and roll you through really nicely. Those are the qualities that I got from it in the marathon, and I think ultimately in the training runs that I did as well, it just feels, I think the key thing that I take away from it is a very accessible marathon shoe, but that doesn't detract from the experience that you're getting, which is a very polished one. It's just competing, I think, against a lot of very strong carbon racing shoes that we've had in to test this year.
Yeah, I agree with all that thing. I think it is a really accessible shoe. It's very comfortable. It is quite mellow for the amount of propulsion and punch you are getting there. It feels like quite chilled on the foot, but it still is delivering a fast ride. The only thing that isn't accessible is potentially the heel design, which has chopped up some people's heels, but I've been okay with it. But I think it's definitely one that leans much more towards those long distances. I have done a few workouts in it and kind of longer stuff in it. I prefer the longer stuff. I prefer workouts at my marathon race pace rather than moving anything faster than that. I think it is a really cruisy shoe that protects the legs really well, but yeah, I think it maybe lacks that top gear that you can get and the range you can get from other carbon shoes, and that might be partly because New Balance also has the SC Pacer V2 in its lineup, which has the same PIBA foam as the SC Elite V4, but a lower stack, a higher drop. It's the shoe that they, I think, worked with in particular with Emily Sisson, the American marathoner, and it's a bit more of an aggressive feel, but it still has what is a very soft PIBA foam in there, the latest version of this fuel cell foam. We've been testing this lately. I've actually liked it a lot. I've surprised me. I kind of I didn't really love it at first. It felt like it's just not quite as bouncy as the SC Elite V4, but actually I've come to warm to it quite a lot. What do you think about the SC Pacer V2, Mike, as a carbon racing shoe?
Yeah, well, again, it's a bit like the SC Elite V4. It's very different from its predecessor. I quite liked the previous shoe, but it was very different. I think it could have benefited from the extra foam that we are getting, and obviously the upgraded one that we saw in the SC Elite V4. And I think ultimately what that gives you, I still think it feels like quite low in terms of that experience, but I think ultimately it does feel a lot more comfortable. It still has that kind of, responsive kind of feel to it. I'm kind of a few runs into it, and again, a bit like Nick, I wasn't 100% convinced, and I think the more running I've done in it, I've started to appreciate when I've been running a little bit harder, doing harder sessions in it, has felt really nice, and I think it feels like a different experience to me from the SC Elite V4, but not necessarily a bad one. I think it's just different, and I do think, unlike the previous shoe, this feels more capable of being a shoe that you can, go longer than 5k and 10k. I don't think that it's out of its remit to do that, and I think it means it's a more versatile version of the Pacer. It's a good weight. I think the sizing was a little bit off for me. That's probably, New Balance sizing can be a little bit off for me across their shoes in general, but I think in terms of what you're getting in the upper, in terms of that kind of ride overall, it feels like a very polished kind of addition to kind of New Balance's kind of racing focused carbon shoes. And again, it's one I didn't absolutely fall in love with in the first run, but I've grown to like this shoe, and I think it's a slightly different experience to the SC Elite V4 personally, but I don't I think there's a nice fast shoe there as well.
Yeah, it's definitely got a very dialed in fit, which I think leans towards the suggestion it's mainly for shorter races. I think there's enough cushioning underfoot there to use this as a marathon shoe if you wanted to, if you like a more direct feel. It certainly has a more direct feel than the SC Elite V4, while still being, quite high stack compared to 5 years ago shoes and stuff like that. Like, I took this shoe down. I actually did another I've done a lot of miles sessions lately using 2 different kinds of carbon shoes. So I did, I think, the first 4 of 6 mile reps in the SC Pacer V2 and was actually really enjoying it. I was running a little bit better than I expected at the time. I was quite short recoveries. I was running pretty good paces, and then I swapped to the SC Elite V4 for the last 2. I expected it to be better because previously when I'd run in both of them at the same time, it just felt cushier, bouncier. The SC Elite V4 was giving you the pace, even though it was a little bit heavier than the Pacer V2. Actually, doing it like that, going into a rep in that shoe, just felt really unnatural and weird at first. It felt like the Pacer V2 had a much more natural fit for my stride. It was direct, it was grounded, it felt great. I could run fast, but was still getting that bounce. The SC Elite V4 felt really rockered suddenly and really big and springy. And the second rep I did in it, I kind of got used to it again. It felt good, but it actually made me appreciate the Pacer's slightly more natural feel all round. Also a shoe though with a bad heel design, and I did a 11-mile run in it the other day, a progression run, and by the end, I hadn't actually broken the skin yet, but I could tell it was going to go. So I think actually the upper and the general comfort around that might be what limits it in terms of distance for me, but the actual underfoot feel is not dissimilar in terms of stack height to things like the original Vaporfly 4%, so there is enough cushion there. You could use it as a longer shoe if you like that feeling. I do think it's actually a pretty impressive shoe all around. The downside of it is, though, for a lower stack shoe, the idea you want it to be really light and aggressive and nimble, it still weighs quite a lot more than things like the Asics Metaspeed Paris series, the On Cloudboom Strike LS. So, you want weight to be a premium in that kind of shoe because that's what you're buying it for. A nimble, short distance racer, and actually it's coming in heavier than quite a lot of carbon shoes without the full stack height. That I think takes away from it a little bit.
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway there is New Balance sort out your heel. Put more padding.
Yeah.
Now we've got one from On, a shoe that is a lot of people have been interested in this shoe. It's a strange looking shoe, and there is another version of it, I think. So this is the On Cloudboom Strike LS.
Yeah, so the On Cloudboom Strike is now their standard top of the range carbon plate racing shoe, which I think we've not included the On Cloudboom Echo 3 in this video. I think it's a pretty good carbon shoe, but the Cloudboom Strike I think is the de facto best On shoe, and if you're looking at that brand, I think this is the one to go for. You've got a higher stack of bouncier foam. Now the On Cloudboom Strike LS is the light spray version, so this is the one that Helen Obiri wore at the Boston Marathon, the Olympic Marathon, with the sprayed on upper, which is made by a robot in a very short amount of time. It looks very cool, and how they make it, and it creates this one piece upper that you basically slip your foot into. There's no laces or anything like that. There's no cushioning, and it makes it a very lightweight upper. So the actual On Cloudboom Strike LS, which is the one I've tested, comes in around 193 grams in my UK size 9, which is very lightweight. Like the only ones lighter, I think, are the Asics Metaspeed shoes, whereas the standard Cloudboom Strike is a bit heavier, and that makes a big difference. And this upper has worked really well for me. But I think both shoes are worth considering because On has figured out their midsole. It's definitely much more comfortable than we've had with On carbon plate racing shoes in the past. A lot bouncier, lighter, faster turnover. They've got the layers of the Hyperion HF Hyper Foam, their PEBA-based foam, and it's a bouncy foam, feels very good, and just all round the geometry is much better underfoot. And then with the On Cloudboom Strike LS, you have got this really great upper on top that has certainly pros in terms of being very lightweight and cons. One is that it's more expensive. 2 is obviously, if the fit doesn't work for you, it just doesn't work for you. There's no adjustment there or anything like that. So me and Tom actually both seem to just get on with shoes quite well. I think we've got quite narrow feet. I can just slip it on in my normal UK size 9, and I had no problems. It held my foot really tightly. The upper didn't stretch at all. I've done over 100k in that shoe. If you have more problems with uppers and you slip it on, it doesn't work. Immediately this shoe I think is not going to be very good for you, and so that's why the On Cloudboom Strike, we haven't tested that shoe, but if it's got the same underfoot feeling, it's going to be a great carbon shoe as well. It's probably the more reliable option, the slightly cheaper option. I wonder if at some point On is going to basically let people come into stores and have their foot scanned to make this upper to fit their feet, because
it wouldn't surprise me. It's definitely well, people have been talking about that for years, haven't they? The personalised shoe upper.
And yeah, because it fuses it onto the midsole very quickly as well, and because otherwise this is a big risk, this upper style, because if it doesn't fit right, then game over. Send it back, kind of thing.
Yeah. Or they could probably do it where you do some sort of scan at home on your phone or something, and then send it across.
Yeah. all good options. Could be coming to a shoe near you, but I got on very well with the upper, and because it makes the shoe lighter, I like it. Really like the upper. Really like the shoe. One of my right up there with my favourite shoes now. I think probably I put like the Asics, the Nike, the On as my top 5 potential. Although the Hoka Cielo X1 is such a good shoe just because it's so bouncy. But in terms of lightweight, fast racers that I'd probably go out for PBs in, the Cloudboom Strike is really up there. And the main thing about that is the fact that On has figured out their midsole. Like the upper draws a lot of attention, and that's the version of the shoe I've tested. But actually, it's just great news that this midsole is now better, higher performance, still paying that On premium, no matter which version of the shoe you go for. We're not necessarily not saying go and get this ahead of the Asics shoes or the Puma shoes or the Nike shoes that are a bit cheaper, but yeah, really good shoe all around the Cloudboom Strike.
High praise.
Yeah, very high praise. Just so expensive, Tom.
Yes, yeah.
Next up, we've got a couple of Saucony racing shoes. Now, the first one is the Saucony Endorphin Elite. The Elite 2 has been launched now on a very limited release, it's fair to say. I think it's more likely we're going to see this in bigger numbers, probably even next year. So we're not going to discuss the Elite 2 yet. We haven't tried it. It sounds a bit softer than the Elite, which is a really good racing shoe, the Saucony Endorphin Elite. It is quite a firm one. It's got a very aggressive rocker. It's a very, very fast shoe, but one I think it's one that we probably use a bit sparingly. I think we've both run and raced quite well in this shoe, but it's not necessarily our favourite, right, Tom?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation about the Elite a couple of days ago. The Elite is one of the weirdest shoes I've ever tested. At the time I got 2 PBs in, but my half marathon PB is still in the Elite, and I still think it's the shoe I can run fastest in. I found it a very excruciatingly difficult experience. It's such an aggressive shoe to wear that by the end of that half marathon, I could really feel my feet being put into a position that wasn't very natural or comfortable, but fast. I don't particularly like the midsole as much as I do in other shoes like the Alphafly. I think it's just a little bit firmer than I would normally like, and it's definitely that aggressive toe off position. It really gets. I definitely couldn't run a marathon in that shoe. I do think it's incredibly fast. I just don't think it's that comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I had a bit of foot fatigue in that shoe after just a 10k race, did a half marathon. I was really beaten up at the end of it, and it's really fast. Like you say, the foam, I think, is one of those ones that's very high in energy return, but feels a bit almost dense. It's like but you can really feel the bounce. I think if you get on with the shoe and don't find that uncomfortable, I think it is one of the fastest shoes out there, but I am glad to hear that it's a bit softer with the second version, because I do think they went all out almost for energy return and ended up quite a firm feeling shoe. But yeah, the rocker's really aggressive and it works well, but maybe just a tad too aggressive. It's also quite an expensive shoe, although one that is in sales now because it is again a bit older. The new version's coming out. Really interested to see what happens with that. So yeah, one that I think probably is up there in terms of pure speed, but not one of our most highly recommended carbon shoes, just because it feels a bit much, and I think for lots of people it will just be a bit aggressive, which is handy for Saucony that they then have another carbon racing shoe that's very good in their lineup, which is the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4, which did come out this year. Now this is a midsole which uses a top layer, which is the same foam as in the Saucony Endorphin Elite, and then a bottom layer, which is the Power Run PB foam used in previous models of the Endorphin Pro. That dual density approach makes it a little bit less kind of firm and aggressive underfoot, I would say. It's still got a very good rocker. Again, doesn't feel quite as aggressive as the Endorphin Elite, but actually a shoe I think that works better for me and probably for lots of people because it is that little bit less aggressive. Tom, you were a huge fan of the Endorphin Pro 3. Endorphin Pro 4, how do you feel about it?
I'm not as big of a fan as I was of the Pro 3. I think the thing I liked about the Pro 3 is that it felt like very natural, but that foam, when it was a single foam, the Power on PB, it was quite soft. It's relatively soft foam. It's also quite bouncy. That's how I've done loads of races in that. I've done 2 marathons in it. I've got PBs in both of those marathons that I ran in it, and I just find it to be a very comfortable, bouncy shoe that just sort of really helps when you keeps the legs fresh and just makes you have a nice consistent pace. I think with the Pro 4, I think it's peppier. I think you can pick up the pace quicker in it. I think it is a faster shoe, but for me, it just lacks. It feels a little bit dull in comparison to the Pro 3. It feels more like a daily shoe to me. It's not 100% a daily shoe, but I think it's more daily than the Pro 3 would be for me.
See, I have the exact opposite feeling about those two shoes. I love the Endorphin Pro 3, but found it over time maybe lost a little bit of its responsiveness and speed for races, and I almost view that more as a daily shoe, a fantastic daily shoe. Obviously it's a racing shoe, but the Endorphin Pro 4 I found was better for me in terms of maintaining fast paces. We did a 10k race in it fairly recently and it was pretty good for that, but I did some really chunky marathon training sessions for it at the start of the year where I was consistently impressed at how well it helped me maintain a hard pace in a long workout. It felt like a really good shoe that I could cruise fast in for long periods. I definitely think that HG foam helped for me in it not bottoming out at all or anything like that, and really give me that pop off the forefoot, where there's a bigger chunk of the HG foam. So I do think it's probably a more suitable shoe still for people than the Saucony Endorphin Elite, just because I think it's just easier to get on with, and it's still a very fast shoe. I think it's a shoe that is undermined a bit by there being the Endorphin Elite, because the Endorphin Pro 4 is still a very good racing shoe that could be a top-class racing shoe for most people, but if you see a shoe that's called the Pro instead of the Elite, you might be put off buying it, but it's also okay value, and one, again, that pops up in sales. So a really good shoe to consider, really nice natural rocker feeling. It's still more of a natural shoe, I think, than many of the carbon shoes out there with that rocker, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. If you were new to carbon racing shoes and you just used daily shoes or cushion shoes before, that would be one that I would suggest going for, because it's a lot more accessible.
Yeah, and it's a bit more stable as well, I think, building on that point. So, yeah, a really good shoe all round, like it a lot. And that is Saucony's racers, the Elite and the Pro 4. Next, we're going to move on to Brooks's top racing shoe, the Hyperion Elite V4, or just 4. I'm not sure if they have a V in the Brooks range. And I think this is the best Brooks racer to date. I don't know, well, Kieran might not agree with me on that, but I think it's the best Brooks race to date, with a new version of the DNA Flash Foam. In general, I think it's fair to say Brooks has lagged behind a bit on carbon shoes. They haven't really gone all in on the very soft and springy foams you get from other brands, and that's still the case with the Hyperion Elite 4, which has a slightly firmer feel, which does mean it offers something a little bit different on the market, but not necessarily sure for me that it's as impressive and dynamic and lively as some of the best carbon shoes, but it is a fast shoe for sure, right, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I really used this in anger, I ran the Barcelona half marathon, and again, I feel like this is perhaps a bit more workhorse than it is racehorse, but it's a shoe that if you're willing to work a bit harder to get more out of it, then it does pay back. It's not necessarily, it's not a carbon ratio, I think, that's sort of driving you forward in the same way as some of the other shoes, but that doesn't mean that it's not fast and it's not kind of race ready for certain distances. Maybe kind of harks back to a bit more of a traditional shoe where you're relying on some of the energy coming from you. It's not giving you that kind of support that shoes like the Alphafly or the Adidas Pro 3 or the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris might do in terms of propelling you forward. It's just not the foam and the combo, the plate, it's just not as good as those other shoes. That said, I didn't dislike it. Actually, I really quite enjoyed racing in it, but that's my preference sometimes is to have a shoe that I'm not relying on it to do all the work, and I quite like the fact that it works. But for me, it sort of drops down almost into, again, that sort of top end of a sort of super trainer bracket. And then when you sort of throw in the price when it first launched, it just felt a little bit more expensive, and it just felt like Brooks was just a couple of levels behind some of the other shoes, the other sort of competition. I also did a marathon test on my own in this shoe, and I think the other end of this is that it's quite accommodating if you're not necessarily running at your best and you do want to go to a sort of slightly sort of middling or slower pace, or the wheels come off, whereas some of those other shoes might not look after you. I think this one can. So at one end you're probably not getting that aggression that you might get from some of the faster carbon shoes, but there is a trade-off, or there's a silver lining, if you want to call it that, where maybe it will look after you a little more if you're not running so well.
You're not running so well. Who cares, Karen? Just walk to the end. That's what I say. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, the price is the problem here, because it's a shoe I like to run in, but it didn't give me the feeling that I was getting from the best carbon shoes out there. And even some of the really good super trainers we've been testing, I think would give it a pretty good run for its money. So I think Brooks probably has to look at foams at some point, or just decide that this is an area they don't, because obviously they're killing it in the training market. They've got loads of great trainers that are very popular. This is the sharp end of the wedge. I don't think it's as important necessarily to the overall business, but it'd be nice to see a really fast Brooks racer that, because I would say probably now most of the brands that I think were lagging a little bit behind have caught up, I'd say, over the last couple of years. Hoka and On in particular made a couple of really good carbon racing shoes, and they were also maybe not quite at the level of some others before. But so yeah, it'd be interesting to see what Brooks does. It's a solid shoe, but it's not one that I'd put in the same tier as most of the others we've been talking about here. Next up, we've got Decathlon's top racing shoe, the Kiprun KD900X LD. That's a lot of numbers, letters, but it's the 900X LD. It is the successor to the 900X. The LD stands for long distance, because I think people felt maybe the first Decathlon carbon shoe was a bit stiff and didn't really feel like a marathon shoe. This has a much softer feel. You've got a new version of their V-foam, Puma foam in the midsole. You've got a higher stack. In general, the design is now much more akin to what you see from most carbon races on the market. And I think the underfoot feel has definitely been improved with the shoe, but we both had some slight upper issues, right, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, I did a marathon test with this. I think I sort of went pretty much fresh out of the box to a marathon, and it was great for much of that run, and then I think into the second half it started to cut underneath my ankle bone. The heel collars or the collars there cut, and I also had quite a lot of blistering and rubbing on both shoes at the base of the Achilles. And that, yeah, I mean, that's obviously a big limiting factor. It didn't seem to matter what I did in order to get rid of that. Yeah, it's never a good sign when shoes draw blood. But it was quite disappointing because other than that, on that run and the marathon test, I felt like they performed pretty well. I think there's some familiarity here in terms of the sort of geometry and the shape and the way the uppers feel and the precision, the agility, all of that kind of stuff with the Metaspeed Sky Paris. I don't think the foam and plate combination are anywhere near as sort of punchy or as energetic or even perhaps as soft and cushion and comfortable, but it's not a million miles away, and I wasn't necessarily expecting a huge amount out of this shoe, and I think it kind of pleasantly surprised me apart from those fit issues. Again, I found it kind of very stiff with the plate, and I quite like that. It has sort of snappy response and turnover, but I think the foam lacks a little bit of energy. There's not quite the kickback that you might get from some of the other carbon race shoes. It is. I found it light and I found it sort of easy to run in. But yeah, this is another shoe that I sort of thought I'd be happy to do shorter training efforts in this, shorter, faster stuff, but maybe not take it over the long haul. I wouldn't pick it over sort of many other shoes. And I think that even though it's arguably at a kind of cheaper price.
So that's obviously the big thing for Decathlon, is to try and pitch it at a price that makes it significantly cheaper whilst retaining most of the performance benefits. For the most part, they have achieved that with the KD900X LD. I think it is an impressive racing shoe, certainly much more impressive than the first version of the shoe, which I actually quite liked, but it was a very stiff and firm shoe and was one that I'd confined to shorter efforts for sure. This one feels much more like a racing shoe. You can do anything in if the fit works for you. Also, I didn't get the heel rubbing issue that Kieran had. I had the plastic thing cutting underneath my ankle, but I did manage to kind of figure out a system that meant that didn't happen in my later runs in the shoe, but it is a bit tricky and certainly something that's a bit of a concern if you're looking at the long distances in particular. If you're also going to go and run with the marathon out of the box like Kieran, don't, I'd say. but maybe check that fit first. But yeah, I do think it's a big step up. I think that foam's really improved. We're going to see it in some other Kiprun shoes as well going forward, and I think it's all pointing in the right direction. It is good value. Problem is, it's good value at RRP. You don't have to buy carbon shoes at RRP anymore. I think that's the big change in the last few years, is you can go and find a very, very, very good carbon shoe in a sale most of the time, especially around big sales events, and that's probably more what the shoe is competing with, rather than saying it's 100 quid cheaper than the Alphafly or something like that on RRP. But actually, if you buy a Vaporfly 2 in a sale, or Vaporfly 3 even, or the Adidas Pro 3, you're probably going to get it similar price, and I think it's still not quite at that standard, but I do think it is a really good racing shoe. If you pick it up and you get on with the fit, you will be able to deliver your finest performances, but I think it's still not quite as good as some of the best. And it's cheap, but it's not like must-have cheap.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's getting in that mix with those shoes that you're going to be looking for deals on. It's even like we just mentioned the Under Armour. There's going to be a lot of shoes that you'll be able to pick up comparative price, and how it stacks up against them, I think, maybe it doesn't look like quite such a good deal.
Yeah, but I'm excited to see Decathlon moving forward, because I think it's, of all the Gen 1 to Gen 2 developments, I think it's one of the biggest step-ups, I think, in quality in terms of the ride that we've seen for brands. They are moving very fast, and that obviously bodes well for the future, but it's a really tricky thing to do, because if you price it too cheap, people will write it off and assume it's not as good, and then if you price it a bit more, people go, well, I'll spend a little bit more and get one from a brand that's more recognised. It's tough, but it's a good shoe. Okay, next up we have something a bit more out there. This is the only shoe from this brand. It's a new brand for us this year, it's fair to say. And only Mike, you're the only person who's tested this shoe. So can you tell us a bit more about the Diadora Gara Carbon?
Yeah, so the Gara Carbon is Diadora's first carbon racing shoe. And I would say a pretty kind of impressive kind of debut shoe. And, in terms of sitting it with other kind of carbon shoes that we talked about, the stacks are pretty similar, or pretty much where the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris and Sky Edges in terms of that experience. I think in terms of the weight, I think for me it was kind of just over, 210 grams, 211 grams for UK size 8. So not the lightest shoe, but still a very light shoe. Now, the big thing is that it's at a premium. It's kind of £250, so it's, you know, it is setting itself right at, you know, the top. And in terms of experience, I've had a really good time running in this shoe. I think there are qualities, qualities that I kind of associate with those Metaspeed shoes. It's not quite there, but I think in terms of that kind of really kind of aggressive, you know, bouncy, kind of just enough bounce in that kind of midsole, there's just a really nice feeling for racing. And I've done some really nice short distance races. I've done some really nice kind of longer kind of at marathon pace runs in this, and it has absolutely held up. I do think there's a few little things that I would probably tweak. I think the outsole was probably not fantastic in terms of durability. There's not a huge amount there. I think the upper kind of elements could be tweaked a little bit, but I think there's definitely something here. I don't think this is kind of Diadora saying, oh, we're doing a carbon racing shoe and we'll see how it goes. They've made a very good shoe here. It's, you know, ultimately, would you pay more for this shoe over the other shoes that sit below it, which we're talking about, the Metaspeed, Sky Paris, or pretty much all the carbon racing shoes we're probably going to talk about, that top tier? Probably not, but if it can do those extra things, I think it would probably put it, you know, a little bit more in line with those shoes, and slightly just, I think if it was priced a little bit closer, I think it would, you know, there would be a debate for people to look at this shoe, because I think they've got a lot of things right with this shoe, and, you know, it's a shoe that, again, I've enjoyed running and has really kind of surprised me in terms of my experience with it.
Brilliant, yeah, so definitely keep an eye on Diadora in the coming years. A bit unexpected, yeah, it's nice when a brand comes back in a big way and produces something good, but yeah, one to look out for sure. Next up, we have one of the more out there carbon shoe designs, which is the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro 2. Now, I ended up taking quite a while to test the shoe, because when I first pulled it on, it felt just a little bit too much for me. I felt like I had a slightly weird feeling in my legs and my feet after using it for a track session, because it's got a very aggressive rocker. It's got a huge heel cutout. You've got a stack that is clearly over 40 millimeters at the midfoot, but they're getting away with it because of the way the shoes are measured, I guess. But it's unbelievably bouncy. Tom, you love a bouncy shoe. You love the shoe, right, for all that pogo bounce.
Yeah, I do absolutely love this shoe. It is a funny shoe. It's a shoe that you have to run in the right way to get the best out of it. I think I've done a lot of training in it. I did a lot of my Boston Marathon interval sessions and stuff like that in that shoe, and I really enjoyed using it for those. You just bounce along, it feels great. I've raced in it a couple of times, didn't really like it for racing. It felt a bit awkward, it just, I mean, that bounce and that rocker is a bit overwhelming sometimes. You can't really run naturally in it. It's a fun shoe. I love running in it, but I wouldn't use it for a marathon or a half marathon that I really wanted to get a good time in.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. It's one that I've got to think about where I'm going to run if I'm going to go out and do it, because you don't be running on like cambered pavement and stuff like that. It's a bit all around. It's an interesting one because it actually is quite accessible in terms of price, because it's not only cheap. I've seen it reduced to half price already, but Mizuno markets it as for sub 230 marathon runners. I mean, I don't hold too much stock with that, because I think more how you get on with it will depend a lot more on your gait and your preferences and stuff like that. I do find I can run very fast in it. I don't necessarily feel like it's a shoe I'd recommend to people though. Like, you've got to really like that feeling and run. I think landing on the sweet spot of that midfoot, which is, it's not far off where I land actually. I'm running fast, but over time, over the course of a long race, even over a short race, you get tired towards the end. It's hard to maintain the position the shoe puts you in. I think that is definitely a challenge as part of it. So it is definitely not the most accessible one, but it is very fun and it is very bouncy. I think it's hard to say a shoe that's bouncier than that shoe, but it's very particular in how you use it.
Chances are, if you're going to buy that shoe, you're going to have another race shoe as well, because you're not going to put all your eggs in that basket, because it might not work for you. I've got friends that have bought it and really just bought it because they were just wanted to see what it was like. Just wanted to go and have some fun on some runs.
It is good, and it is one of the more interesting shoes out there. I think a lot of carbon shoes are getting a bit more homogenized these days because of the World Athletics regulations. Like, there's a proven template that works, and this is a bit out there, a bit different, a bit I mean, theoretically should be illegal given the height of the midfoot, but isn't. So, But yeah, very fun shoe, but you got to work a bit harder in it. And I think if it doesn't work for you naturally, it might not be one that's really a good idea to go into a marathon in, like Tom says. Moving on to the Under Armour Velociti Elite 2. I don't think there's a flow in the name of this one, Kieran. I know we're always a bit confused by the amount of flow. This is quite a different carbon shoe to what you have on the market, because the drop is listed at different things, different places, but this feels like a very low drop shoe to me. It feels like a shoe that very much suits a forefoot strike to me, I find, and I enjoyed it quite a bit when I was doing shorter intervals in the shoe, but trying to cruise through longer, hard runs, I didn't enjoy quite as much. I don't think you're necessarily getting as much back. They have put some more PIBA in the midsole here compared to the first version, but it's still quite a weighty shoe and not necessarily one that I think delivers the same amount of punch you can get elsewhere, but it's a great looking shoe. What do you think about it, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's another shoe from Under Armour that I kind of put in the bracket. It's sort of good, but not great. It's got a slightly odd shape. I think there's a sort of really pronounced rocker. Even though you've got that low drop, there's a really pronounced rocker that, for me, it works because I tend to strike kind of mid to forefoot. And when I'm up on my toes and running well, I think the shoe performs best. If you sort of slow down a bit, there's a sort of slightly strange feeling where I feel like you've got this kind of bowl of foam underneath the ball of your foot, and it doesn't feel quite so natural. One thing I really like about Under Armour's race shoes is I think they have good stepping comfort. They've got sort of breathable, airy kind of uppers, and they feel quite natural in terms of the way they kind of lace onto the foot. Almost sort of the opposite, I think, to the Adidas Pro 3. I think the shoe lands in the sort of firmer and stiffer basket, which is something I also respond well to, and it definitely has a bit more oomph than the original Elite. It's one of the shoes that I'd say, if I was stuck on an island and this was the only shoe to run in, I had to run fast in it, I'd probably be perfectly happy with it. When you put it up against some of the competition, I still think that this shoe lags behind, and I'm not entirely convinced by that overall ride that you get. Again, I think it sort of almost drops down into a shoe that I'd be happy to do more of my faster training in, and then I'd maybe swap to other shoes that I think would perform better on race day.
Yeah, I think compared to the first one, it does feel faster. The first one, I think, had the quality, though, of being a shoe you could use almost every day. I think it felt like quite a good all-rounder shoe, but this one feels much more fast, and for me, like I say, it feels much more like an interval shoe, almost for me, with my running style as a more shuffly heel striker. But I liked it. Okay, did run a park run and enjoyed it enough, but I think Under Armour has to make quite a big change to this design, I think, to make it competitive. I think you've got to drop because it's dual density midsole, you've got the flow foam underneath. I think that makes it a heavy shoe. It feels a little bit bottom heavy to me at times. I think it mutes the bounce of their PIBA foam, which I think we still haven't really felt at its best yet because it's always paired with this flow foam. So I think they might have to go to a full PIBA midsole. It's the kind of thing where, in my mind, the brand already has a third or fourth version of this that will be a full PIBA midsole. It's like, I want to get there. I want to get there already and just try that because this shoe doesn't quite hit the standards of others. But yeah, the upper is certainly very good. Put that upper on an Adidas shoe, and we'll be talking. But for now, not quite. I think that stands out. Although, again, is one that goes for unbelievable prices at times. Like it was already at half price, I think, in some places when we first reviewed it.
Yeah, and I think if that's the thing. For some people, this would be like a really good bargain, sort of fast day potential race shoe, I think, but wouldn't necessarily be top of the pile.